Here's a rewritten, more emotional, engaging and simple version of your section in conversational, viral-ready style. Ayoka walked into the sparkling restaurant, her heart buzzing with excitement. It was the company's anniversary dinner, her first big event since joining, and she had imagined herself laughing with her colleagues, sharing stories, maybe even impressing her boss. She wore her favorite dress, a soft gold fabric that shimmered under the lights, and her hair braided neatly with tiny beads catching the glow. The smell of roasted meats and spices made her stomach rumble, but she pushed down her nerves. As she moved toward the table with a hopeful smile, her manager stepped in front of her. "Oh, this section is only for executives," he said, his tone casual, almost mocking. "You can sit outside." A ripple of laughter ran through the group. Ayoka froze. The room suddenly felt too bright, too loud, like everyone was watching her heart break in slow motion. She forced herself to smile, nodded politely, and walked to the small table near the window. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted her chair. The laughter echoed in her ears, but inside, something stronger was stirring, a quiet burning fire. She whispered to herself, "One day I won't need their table. I'll have my own. If you want, I can rewrite the next section, the silent walk home, in the same style so the story keeps building cinematic emotion. Do you want me to do that next?" Here's a rewritten, more emotional, viral-ready version of the silent walk home, in simple, engaging English. That night, Ayoka walked alone through the quiet streets of Nibira. The heels of her shoes clicked softly on the wet pavement, mixing with the faint hum of distant traffic. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the streets glistening like glass under the city lights, and her reflection flickered in every puddle. She held her coat tighter around her, but it did little to stop the shiver running through her body, not from the cold but from the sting of humiliation. Her mind replayed the dinner again and again. She had worked late nights, given her best to every project, stayed patient even when her ideas were ignored. And yet, in that sparkling restaurant, she had been treated as if she didn't exist. The laughter of her colleagues echoed in her ears, a cruel soundtrack she couldn't escape. Her cheeks burned and hot tears slipped down, blurring the bright neon signs and golden street lamps. She paused under a lonely streetlight, staring at the glimmering puddles at her feet. She wanted to scream, to tell the world how unfair it was, but the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, she whispered softly to herself, "One day, I won't need their table. I'll build my own, and they'll see." Her voice was quiet, but inside it carried the weight of a promise, a fire that humiliation could not douse. Ayoka lifted her chin, letting the rain-soaked wind hit her face, feeling it wash away the last of her doubt. She walked on, each step a little stronger than the last, imagining a future where she would sit at her own table, in a place she had built with her hands, her heart, and her courage. And for the first time that night, a small smile broke through the sadness. She didn't yet know how, but she knew one thing for certain. She was not finished yet. If you like, I can now do the breaking point in the same cinematic, emotional style so the story keeps. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional and viral-ready version of the breaking point. The next morning, Ayoka walked into the office with a calm she had spent the night building. Her bag felt heavier than usual, not because of the weight of her things, but because of the decision she was about to make. She approached her manager's desk, her heels silent against the polished floor, and placed her resignation letter in front of him. He looked up, one eyebrow raised, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You'll be back," he said casually, as if predicting the weather. "People like you don't survive on their own." His words were meant to wound, to shake her, to make her question herself. For a moment the old doubt flickered in her mind, but it was quickly replaced by something far stronger. Ayoka met his gaze steadily, letting the silence stretch between them. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but it wasn't fear. It was determination, fierce and bright. She said nothing, leaving him staring at the empty envelope in disbelief. Every late night, every ignored suggestion, every laugh she had endured at the dinner, it all came together in that quiet moment. As she walked out of the office, her footsteps echoed with a new rhythm, one that was hers alone. She didn't look back, didn't let the sting of his words follow her. Inside, her heart burned with a mix of anger and hope, a fire she knew could not be doused by anyone else's doubt. Outside, the sun was just starting to rise over Nibira City, casting a golden glow over the streets. Ayoka breathed it in, feeling the weight of the past lifting slightly with each step. She whispered to herself, "If they think I can't survive, they have no idea what I'm capable of." In that moment, leaving wasn't defeat. It was the first brave step toward a table she would one day own. A place where respect, not mockery, would greet her. If you want, I can continue with The Seed of an Idea next. Key. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional, and cinematic version of The Seed of an Idea. That evening, Ioka sank into the worn armchair in her small apartment, the city lights outside casting soft shadows on the walls. She felt drained, her body heavy from the tension of the morning, but her mind refused to rest. Her eyes fell on an old leather-bound book sitting on the kitchen counter, her grandmother's recipe book. The pages were yellowed, edges frayed, filled with her grandmother's neat handwriting and notes about meals that had fed generations of their family. She opened it slowly, running her fingers over familiar recipes: spicy jollof rice, peppered goat stew, roasted plantains with palm oil. Each page carried more than food. It carried memory, love, and resilience. Ioka smiled through her tears, remembering the nights her grandmother had cooked for the family, her laughter filling the small kitchen, her hands moving quickly but gracefully as she created magic from simple ingredients. Sitting there, Ioka felt a spark light inside her. She whispered to herself, her voice soft but firm, "If they won't let me sit at their table, I'll build one from my roots." The words echoed in the quiet apartment, carrying with them a promise she had not dared to say aloud before. She could almost see it, a place filled with warmth, with aroma that wrapped around people like a hug, with tables where everyone was welcome and every meal told a story. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope flicker in her chest. This wasn't just about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about taking the love she had inherited, the traditions her family had passed down, and creating something that could touch people's lives, just as her grandmother's cooking had touched hers. Ioka closed the book gently and set it on the counter. Her mind was racing with ideas, her heart alive with possibility. That night, sleep came slowly, but it came with dreams of sizzling pots, laughter. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional, and cinematic version of The Struggle Begins. With her last savings, Ioka rented a tiny street stall at the corner of a busy market road in Nibira. The stall was small, almost bare, with a rusty sign that simply read Ioka's Kitchen. But to her, it felt like the first stone in the foundation of her dream. She unpacked her grandmother's old pots and pans, set out bowls, and carefully arranged the fresh ingredients she had bought that morning: yams, peppers, plantains, and fragrant herbs. That first day, the crowd was thin. People passed by without stopping, and the occasional curious glance made her heart tighten. Sweat ran down her back as she cooked, stirring pots with careful hands, tasting every bite to make sure it carried the flavor she remembered from her grandmother's kitchen. Each plate she served, she offered with a warm smile, a nod, a few kind words. "Try this, it's made with love," she'd say softly, hoping her warmth would travel with the food. Slowly, something magical began to happen. The first customer, an old man with tired eyes, came back the next day with his grandchildren. They laughed and devoured her pepper stew, leaving empty plates and happy smiles. Soon, another passerby stopped, then another, and each left with a nod of thanks and a sparkle in their eyes. Word traveled quickly through the market, not just about the taste of her food, but the care she poured into every plate. People began to linger, chatting with her, asking about her recipes, returning the next day with friends. Every evening, as she packed up the empty bowls and wiped the counters, Ioka felt a quiet satisfaction. The days were long and the money was small, but each smile, each returning customer, felt like proof that she was on the right path. She whispered to herself under the fading sun, "This is just the beginning." With her heart full of determination, she knew that little by little, through sweat, tears, and love. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional, and cinematic version of The Small Miracle. One warm afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, a young man with a camera and a curious smile stopped in front of Ioka's stall. He introduced himself as a food blogger, one who traveled the city looking for hidden gems. Ioka felt a flutter of nerves, wondering if her small corner of Nibira could impress someone like him. With a polite nod, she served him her signature dishes: steaming spicy yam, pepper stew glistening with oil, and golden roasted plantains. The blogger took a bite, his eyes widening with surprise. He laughed softly, savoring the flavors. This is incredible," he said, filming every moment. He asked her questions about the recipes, her inspiration, and the story behind her little stall. Ioka spoke softly, her words carrying pride and hope, sharing memories of her grandmother and the dream she had started on a rainy evening. Within hours, the video went online. People watched in awe as the camera captured the sizzling pots, the rich colors of her dishes, and the smile she gave every customer. Comments poured in. "Where can I find this food? I need to try Ioka's cooking. Her story is amazing." By the end of the week, long lines formed around the small stall. Customers waited patiently under umbrellas, chatting and laughing as they anticipated their turn. Ioka moved between pots and plates, her hands flying, her heart swelling with every compliment, every grateful smile. Her humble dream was no longer just hers. It had touched the hearts of the city. Strangers came from neighborhoods she had never visited, all drawn by her food and the warmth she served with it. That evening, as she counted the day's earnings and wiped down the counters, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope turning into reality. She whispered to herself, a quiet laugh escaping her lips. "This is just the beginning. One day this little pot will feed." Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional and cinematic version of the growth. With the money she had earned from her little stall, Ioka finally rented a small restaurant space in a busy part of Nabira City. She painted the walls gold and maroon, colors that felt warm and rich, and hung woven baskets, African masks, and paintings that told stories of her heritage. Every corner of the restaurant carried a piece of her roots, a tribute to her grandmother and the generations of women who had cooked with love before her. On opening day, Ioka dressed in her finest traditional attire, a flowing indigo dress embroidered with gold, her hair braided with colorful beads. She felt a mixture of nerves and pride as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The aroma of her cooking, spicy yam, pepper stew, roasted plantains, filled the air instantly. It wasn't just food. It was a feeling, a memory, a comfort that wrapped around everyone who walked in. Customers trickled in at first, curious about the new place, but it didn't take long for word to spread. People came not just for the flavors but for Ioka herself. She greeted every guest with a warm smile, remembering their names, asking how their families were, making each person feel like part of something bigger than a meal. She moved between the tables, carrying dishes, sharing laughter, and occasionally offering little stories behind each recipe. By the end of the first week, her restaurant had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a landmark. People came from all over Nabira to experience the warmth, the flavors, and the energy that Ioka brought. Even strangers felt like friends under the golden lights and woven decorations of her restaurant. Each night, as she closed the doors and took a moment to breathe in the scent of her kitchen, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. From a small street stall to this beautiful space, she realized she was building more than a restaurant, she was buoy. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional and cinematic version of The Return of the Mockers. One warm evening, as the golden lights of Ioka's restaurant glowed against the bustling streets of Nabira, a group of suited executives walked in. Their chatter filled the space, confident and loud, until Ioka noticed a familiar figure among them, her former manager. He walked with the same smug posture, scanning the room as if he owned it, unaware that the little corner he once ignored had grown into something extraordinary. Ioka took a deep breath and adjusted her dress, a rich burgundy gown that shimmered under the soft lights. She approached their table with a calm smile, her head held high. "Good evening, welcome to Ioka's pot," she said warmly, setting menus in front of each of them. Her voice carried a quiet authority, the kind that comes from hard work, pain and triumph. Her former manager looked up, frowning slightly. He didn't recognize her at first. The confident, radiant woman in traditional attire standing before him was nothing like the timid employee he had dismissed. Ioka leaned slightly to explain a dish, describing the ingredients with passion and love. As she straightened, his eyes fell on the small brass sign beside the table. Owner, Chef Ioka Adisa. The smirk that had once haunted her dissolved instantly. His lips parted in surprise, then tightened as shame flickered across his face. Around the table, his colleagues whispered and exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the elegance, the taste, and the aura Ioka carried effortlessly. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. For the first time, Ioka saw the weight of her determination reflected in his stunned silence. She offered a polite nod, a silent message in her eyes, She had risen, and she had done it with grace, skill, and heart. Turning away, she moved to another table, her head high, the soft jingling of the restaurant's entrance bell marking her every step. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional, and cinematic version of the invitation. Weeks later, Ayoka was arranging fresh herbs in the kitchen when a courier delivered a neatly sealed envelope. It was heavy and elegant, the kind of envelope that felt important the moment you touched it. She tore it open carefully, her fingers trembling, and pulled out a letter printed on thick, glossy paper. As she read the words, her heart skipped a beat. The letter was from the very company that had laughed at her, the same group that once refused to let her sit at their table. They were planning their next anniversary dinner, and they wanted to host it at her restaurant. Ayoka sank into a chair, staring at the paper, her eyes wide, her breath catching. Her fingers traced the company logo at the top, then the lines that confirmed it. The tables, the lights, the menu, all would be hers to prepare and serve. A slow, incredulous smile spread across her face. She could hear echoes of that terrible night in the luxury restaurant, the laughter that had cut through her confidence like a knife. And now, here she was, the one in control, the one creating the experience, the one who had turned rejection into triumph. Her chest swelled with pride, but it wasn't just pride. It was poetic justice, a quiet, perfect kind of victory that didn't need shouting or revenge. She held the letter against her heart, imagining the night of the dinner. Her restaurant filled with the city's top executives, the lights shimmering, her staff moving gracefully, the aroma of her food filling every corner. She pictured herself greeting guests with calm authority, a smile that carried all the strength and grace she had built over these months. Tears blurred her vision, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition of how far she had come, how she had turned pain into power, and how the same people who once doubted her would now witness her brilliance. Whispering softly, here's a rewritten, simple, emotional, and cinematic version of the night of triumph. The night of the anniversary dinner, Ayoka's restaurant glowed like a jewel in the heart of Nibira City. Soft golden lights reflected off the maroon and gold walls, casting warm shadows across the woven baskets and African art that decorated the space. The air smelled of roasted herbs, sizzling spices, and fresh bread, but beneath it all was a taste of victory, sweet and unmistakable. Executives arrived in tailored suits, their confident chatter filling the room, while photographers moved silently, capturing the elegance of the evening. Cameras flashed as Ayoka greeted each guest with calm poise, her smile radiant but steady. She wore an emerald green gown that shimmered under the lights, gold jewelry glinting against her skin, her hair braided and adorned with tiny beads that caught the glow. Every movement she made radiated quiet power, a strength earned through months of struggle, determination, and resilience. As the guests were seated, Ayoka moved gracefully between tables, describing the dishes with pride and passion. Each plate told a story. Her grandmother's recipes transformed into meals that spoke of love, heritage, and triumph. People whispered among themselves, impressed not only by the flavors but by the woman who had created it all. Even those who once laughed at her stole glances, their expressions a mix of awe, surprise, and perhaps a hint of shame. From the kitchen to the dining area, Ayoka's presence was magnetic. She didn't need to speak loudly or assert herself. The room knew she belonged here, fully and undeniably. Each clink of cutlery and murmur of appreciation echoed like applause in her ears, a symphony of recognition for the journey she had undertaken. Later, as she paused to glance around the room, she felt a deep, glowing satisfaction. This night wasn't just about the company's dinner. It was about every late night, every struggle, every tea. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional, and cinematic version of the recognition. Ayoka stepped onto the small stage at the center of her restaurant, the warm lights casting a golden glow over her emerald green gown. The murmurs of the crowd quieted as all eyes turned toward her. Whispers rippled through the room, soft but unmistakable. People were talking about her, the same colleagues and executives who once dismissed her, laughed at her, and made her feel invisible. Now they were watching her, fully present with admiration and awe. Her former manager was there too, standing among the crowd in a sharp suit. His eyes dropped to the floor as he realized who she had become. The confident, radiant woman standing before everyone was nothing like the timid employee he had mocked. For the first time, he looked small, overshadowed by the brilliance of someone he had underestimated. Ayoka smiled, a gentle, serene smile that reached her eyes. It wasn't pride or vengeance that colored it, but peace, a deep, quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've worked for something, earned it, and claimed it with integrity. She spoke into the microphone with a soft but clear voice, welcoming everyone, telling them about the dishes, the inspiration behind them, and the journey that had brought her here. Every word carried warmth, humility, and the undeniable truth that she had built this empire with her own hands. Around her the crowd clapped, some rising to their feet. Faces she remembered, some kind and some cruel, now reflected admiration. She caught glimpses of astonished eyes, whispered apologies, and impressed smiles. And in that moment Ioka realized something profound. This recognition wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about honoring herself, her roots, and the journey she had taken. As the applause washed over her, she closed her eyes for a brief second, letting it sink in. She had turned every moment of doubt, every laugh, every painful memory. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional, and cinematic version of the toast. As the dinner began, the restaurant hummed with excitement, the golden lights reflecting off polished tables and the glimmering faces of the guests. Ioka moved quietly among them, checking dishes, smiling at familiar faces, and feeling the weight of every moment she had worked to reach this night. The air was rich with the aroma of her food, roasted herbs, spices, and memories turned into meals, a scent that now felt like triumph itself. When the company director rose, the room fell silent, every eye turning toward him. He lifted his glass high, his voice carrying clearly over the murmurs. "To the woman who turned rejection into an empire," he said, pausing for effect, "Chef Ioka, your food reminds us that success tastes best when shared." The words hung in the air like music, and then, as if on cue, the entire room erupted into applause. The sound was thunderous, a wave of recognition and respect that rolled across the tables. People cheered, clapped, and smiled, some even rising to their feet. Ioka felt the warmth of their admiration wash over her, her heart pounding in rhythm with the celebration. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she didn't try to hide them. They were tears of joy, of release, and of validation. Every struggle, every humiliation, every long night spent perfecting her recipes had led to this moment. She glanced around at the faces before her, some familiar, some strangers, and realized that each person there had witnessed a story of resilience, courage, and determination brought to life. Raising her own glass quietly, Ioka whispered a soft thanks to herself, to her grandmother, and to every small step that had built her journey. She didn't need to say anything out loud. The applause, the smiles, and the energy of the room spoke volumes. For the first time she felt the full weight of her accomplishment, a life she had claimed, a dream she had nurtured. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional, and cinematic version of the full circle moment. Later that night, as the last guests laughed and left, Ioka moved through the restaurant, checking that everything was in order. The soft glow of the golden lights reflected on the walls, casting warm shadows over the empty tables. The air was thick with the lingering aroma of spices, roasted herbs, and victory. She felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest, the kind that comes from knowing you've truly earned something. By the doorway, she noticed a familiar figure standing awkwardly, his hands loosely clasped in front of him. It was her old manager, the same man who had refused to let her sit at the company dinner months ago. He looked small, unsure, and strangely humbled as he watched her move gracefully across the room. "You built something incredible," he said quietly, his voice low, almost lost in the soft hum of the closing night. There was no trace of mockery, only an uneasy respect. Ioka paused for a moment, meeting his eyes with a calm smile. Her heart didn't swell with pride or revenge, but with peace. She leaned slightly toward him and said softly, "You helped. You refused me a seat, so I built my own table." The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful, carrying the weight of every struggle, every tear, and every moment of determination that had led to this point. Her old manager said nothing, only nodded slightly, understanding in silence what she had achieved, and what he had underestimated. Turning away, Ioka walked down the aisle between the tables, her head held high, the soft jingling of her earrings marking each step. She didn't look back. The night was hers, the restaurant was hers, and the victory was hers. Every laugh, every doubt, every hand that once pushed her down had become fuel for her rise. She smiled to herself, knowing she had not only claimed her dream, but she had done it with grace, strength, and dignity that no one could. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional and cinematic version of the empire expands. Months passed, and Ioka's pot grew far beyond the little restaurant that once stood on a quiet corner of Nabira City. Her dream had expanded into a chain of fine dining restaurants across the region, each one carrying the same warmth, aroma, and story that had started in her grandmother's kitchen. The golden and maroon walls, woven baskets, and African art now welcomed hundreds of people every day. But no matter how big it got, every plate carried the same love and care she had poured into that first humble stall. Ioka made sure her success reached beyond herself. She trained young chefs, especially women who had faced rejection, ridicule, or doubt. She shared not only recipes, but lessons in courage, dignity, and perseverance. Pain can be a teacher, she would tell them, her voice gentle but firm. Humiliation can be fuel. And your roots, your history, your family, your story, can be the foundation of something powerful. Her protégés watched in awe as she moved through kitchens, tasting sauces, adjusting spices, and offering guidance with patience and pride. Her story spread across social media and local news. People called her the woman who turned rejection into a movement, the chef who built an empire from love, sweat, and determination. Parents pointed to her as an example for their daughters. Young women felt inspired to pursue their dreams, and even those who had doubted her in the past began to speak her name with respect. At the center of it all, Ioka remained humble. Every evening after the last customer had left, she walked through her restaurants, inhaling the aroma of roasted herbs, listening to the quiet clinks of dishes being cleaned, and remembering the journey from a small street stall to an empire. She smiled softly, knowing that the table she had built was more than just a place to eat. It was a symbol of courage, grace, and the power to rise up. Here's a rewritten, simple, emotional, and viral-ready version of the viral legend of Ioka. Across Africa, Ioka's story spread like wildfire. Social media feeds were flooded with her name, her journey, and her triumph. Headlines shouted, "They refused to let her sit at the dinner table, but she bought the restaurant." Photos of Ioka in her regal emerald gown, gold jewelry catching the sunlight, and her radiant smile went viral. People couldn't get enough of the woman who had turned humiliation into power, who had built an empire from love, sweat, and courage. She became known as the Queen of her own table, a title that didn't just celebrate her success, but honored her resilience, grace, and determination. Videos showed her greeting customers, training young chefs, and moving through her restaurants with calm authority, a living example that dignity can rise from rejection, and dreams can rise from pain. Comments poured in from all corners. "She gives me hope. This is what strength looks like." Ioka is proof that you can turn any setback into a comeback. Teachers shared her story in classrooms, parents told their daughters about her courage, and young women across the continent looked to her as a symbol that their dreams were valid, no matter the obstacles. Even those who had once laughed at her watched her rise, unable to ignore the fire she carried. Ioka didn't just own restaurants. She owned her destiny. She had taken a moment of cruelty and transformed it into a lifetime of triumph. And as her story continued to inspire millions, one truth remained clear. Sometimes being refused a seat is just the beginning of your coronation. If you want, I can now combine all 15 sections into a full, seamless 4,000-word cinematic viral story, polished and ready for publishing. Do you want me to do that next?